My name is Kevin Dupont, and I am currently a career counselor and head of department at Al Ittihad Schools in Dubai. I went to Brandeis University for my Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and the Bachelor of Arts in International and Global Studies. I graduated in 2016. Then I went to Tufts University, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, the Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy. I graduated in 2019, and then I did my education specialist degree, so EdS from UCLA in counseling. Circumnavigation was in 2015, and my research topic was the influence of social media on political activism. The Boston chapter sponsored me on my trip. I did China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Israel, Palestine, Turkey, Greece, Tunisia, and Morocco. When I was in Shanghai, I learned a lot more about personal sense of navigation and how to incorporate just general sense of direction and wherewithal to go from being lost to not being lost while navigating the metro system or just walking around. Shanghai is a massive city. And so that really allowed me that sort of just getting lost and then getting back on track again was just kind of a unique way to learn kind of how to navigate without the use of technology, maybe, or with a very poor Google Maps at the time, or poor Maps application because Google Maps doesn't work in China. And then in Greece, very different situation. I learned that navigating a protest is not as easy as it sounds when you are trying to speak with people and and kind of understand what their passions are and then getting out of the protest. So that was more of just a like complete whirlwind of an experience. I never thought I'd found myself within, but I did. So I came to Hong Kong right after Shanghai, and so Shanghai is obviously a huge metropolis, lots of tall buildings. Hong Kong is the same, but in about like a 50th of the space. So it's very much on top of each other, very much condensed together. And as soon as you arrive, you see the similarities and the differences, and so it's a very unique place because there's so much happening at once. And everywhere you look, there's a different sort of type of building or like different, you can see things piled together and you can see the levels are like different levels of history, right? So building on the first level, might be from the 1800s, and then the second level might be the 1900s, and then the third level to 2000s. And it's just like things just build on top of each other, which is really cool. And then when you go around both sides of Hong Kong Island, Kowloon Island, you see the different sort of cultures coming into play, the emphasis of, or the influence of the British versus the influence of the Chinese, and then other cultures all mixed in. It was really a unique place to see everything going on at once. And even the Portuguese, they were there as well. So you could see all of those different sort of influences all crashed together to make Hong Kong what it is. And it's still to this day one of my favorite places to go. Obviously, when we can travel safely. In Hong Kong, I was interacting with individuals that were very close to the protests of the early 2010s. Not so much maybe the people themselves, but affiliates, which allowed me to really understand like things on the ground that were happening. And I think since 2015, Hong Kong has had many more iterations of their social unrest, and so that for me really allowed me to see social media kind of playing more of a role in like logistics and organization rather than it did like using social media as a way of like proclamation, I guess you could say. Whereas in Turkey it was a bit different. Turkey was using it more for proclamation and less so for organization at the time. They had kind of already planned ahead. So there was two very different approaches to the use of social media in these different countries. And I think the thing with Hong Kong was that Hong Kong has the access to a bit more of a freer internet, if we can call it that. Whereas Turkey, it's very much more regulated. When I got to meet the Singapore chapter of the club, it was really nice to interact with individuals who had also done a circumnavigation, or who knew kind of similarities to my experience, especially in a place like Singapore, which I had never been to before. It was nice to learn a little more about the culture and try different types of local cuisines I never would have ordered because I didn't know what they were. They just ordered things and I ate them. Um, but it was really nice to see that global camaraderie kind of come together, and people talked about, oh, when I was in this country, when I was in that country, and we compared different experiences. And looking back, that was probably one of the highlights of my trip, because it was people who had kind of had similar experiences coming together, even though they were at different points in time, and we could kind of share and compare notes, so to speak, of different places. So that was really, really unique and exciting. Um, and looking back, even though it was only a couple of hours, it was still a really nice experience. I still remember eating some sort of seafood cuisine out of what I think was like a melon or something. It's like a soup almost, and this melon thing. I don't know. It's really good, but that was really fun, really cool experience overall. Thing I never experienced any sort of temple like these before, and so it was really eye opening to see all of the different sort of approaches to the Buddhist faith, or to other maybe other sects of that religious belief system, and see the different statues and the different sort of architecture and ways to show devotion, and all of these things I thought was really special, because I really had never had the chance to be exposed, and I could understand a lot more about how the society was sort of structured, because I was able to explore the temples, and almost not knowing 100% of what was going on helped me, because then I could ask questions and think, what does that mean? What's the significance of this? And sometimes the person who I asked was like, oh, I don't really know. But then it kind of just allowed me to probe a little bit more. So I visited the original Olympic Stadium, according to what archaeologists there say. And so it's very long and flat, as one I guess would expect it to be. But it was really cool to sort of see where these ancient games began, and being there was really cool, just to go through history and imagine, oh yeah, people ran down this track, or and these were the greatest athletes of their time, just like they are now, of course. But it was just really kind of a unique place to be. And I stumbled upon it by accident. I wasn't trying to go there. I just accidentally found myself outside of the original Olympic Stadium. This is my first day in Tel Aviv, in Israel, and I don't speak Hebrew. And so there was a sign on the door to the building I was staying in. I didn't know what it said. It was just a sign plastered there, nice and big, but not that big, but just the sign there. I'm like, okay, there are some words there. I don't know what they mean. No big deal. The building had lots of signs, but this one particularly stood out. I think it was highlighted or something. Okay, whatever. So I was out in the morning doing some research collection. I came back to prepare for the afternoon and the evening, and an alarm goes off. And it's not like a fire alarm, it's a missile alarm. And so I'm like, okay, all right, I know what this is, I think. What in the world do I do with this? So I'm thinking quickly, in the 2 minutes of, I guess, mental clarity I had, was grab everything that's valuable: passport, phone, money, some snacks, throw it in a bag. And I'm rushing out the door, grab some water on the way out, toilet paper. I don't know why I grabbed toilet paper, but okay. Grab it, throw it in the bag. The bag's not zipped. Stuff's probably falling out. I'm running out the door. Oh my God, missile alarm. Where do I go? And then I open the door, and everyone's just chilling, sipping their coffee, having a picnic on the grass. Nothing's wrong. I go over somewhere and I go, excuse me, the alarm is going off. Why? Where do we go? And she goes, no, it's a test, and you didn't know that? I go, no, I just didn't know that was a test. No one told me that. She goes, oh yeah, the sign's right there. Didn't you see it? It was a sign that was on the door and highlighted that I couldn't read. And so, yes, it was a missile alarm test set by the Israeli Defense Forces, which I didn't know was happening. So I have like things coming out of my bag. I'm all, in a rush, stress, thinking of where I'm going. And actually, there was no need to go through all that stress. And I think as I turned away, the people kind of laughed at me because I looked clearly distressed. So that was kind of a funny experience looking back. That well, now I know how to respond in case a missile alarm goes off where I am. The experience in Morocco was a bit tricky, and part of it was at the time my just sort of, I guess we could say naivety, perhaps. But I was having lunch. I was having a chicken dish. Looked fine to me. I really had no concerns. In the back of my head, I said something doesn't seem right about this, and I don't know why my head thought that, but I thought it. And the food looked completely normal. I ate it, and then about 36 hours later, things were not so great. And so, in that experience, especially when you're alone, it's really recognizing um, what are the most pertinent needs and how and who to communicate with to get those things like water, for example, or bananas or something that you can eat. And because at least in the salmonella case, you're not really mobile. You're pretty much immobile for however long it took. For me, I think it took me about 6 days to really be functioning like a human being again. 3 days of just being straight out sick, and then a couple of days of slow little walks again. But in terms of when someone is traveling abroad, I would say that the first thing is to really recognize terminologies. So, does your situation require a local clinic, or does it require a hospital? Sometimes hospitals um, may be helpful in a situation, or they could actually be a bit more challenging because there could be longer wait times, and a clinic could be closer, and they can still do the same thing. Um, and unfortunately, my experiences with stomach illnesses was not unique just to that experience in Morocco. So now that I have had experienced it, I knew how to respond the second time it happened. Thankfully, it was much less of a difficult experience. But knowing kind of what resources one needs and how to either ask for those things or communicate those things is really important. And then I also think while it's hard to do this in reality, but just remaining calm and through some of the more shall we say, challenging moments when you're feeling unwell is important, because that's when maybe some more brash decisions or scenarios could take place. And for example, I remember and during my experience, there was a type of water, and I should have asked for water without carbonation because that upsets your stomach, and I didn't do that because I wasn't really thinking clearly, and that upset my stomach for a little bit. So it's those little things of trying to remain calm that can really help you. I made a friend in Greece and another in Thailand. So my friend in Thailand, I'm still close with today. I just spoke with him yesterday, I think, and that sort of friendship was only happened because I was there, and it was really nice to have that person to really kind of allow you to get your bearings a bit more. And obviously, my trip was over 6 years ago now, so it's that friendship has stayed quite strong throughout those 6 years. And then in Greece, it was a bit of a different sort of friendship because the person was actually my Airbnb host, and I never expected to really become friends with my Airbnb host, but I did. And so we still chat briefly. It's not the greatest of friendships, but it was really nice just to be able to get to know someone, especially when you're in that sort of like formally informal sort of environment. And now we talk about like, oh, what's Greece like, with sports, or what's going on in Greece with COVID or whatever that is. It's a little chit chat here and there. It's been nice. I think a lot of my circumnavigation and the research project, I didn't understand what I learned right away. It took a long time because you're in a whirlwind of however long it is. But the entire trip taught me about social media, sure. It taught me about political activism, sure. But I think what it really taught me was how people as individuals are not truly that different in terms of what they need, what their goals are, what their motivations are. But it's actually just kind of how we use the mediums around us to achieve those things. And so, but I learned a lot about social media. The social media in Greece, that platform was a different platform to that of Turkey or Tunisia or China, but people were using it in a very similar way to achieve their end goal. And so I think I learned more about how people differ and how people will utilize whatever they can to achieve the goal that they're looking for, rather than like so much about like social media or political activism itself. I think I learned more about the people behind all of that. The few months after my trip were definitely a bit challenging because the end of my trip was quite traumatic and tumultuous, getting salmonella. So going through all of that in a place where medical care was not the most accessible at the time, or I didn't really feel strong enough to have a kind of a sound perception of where I was. This was a bit shocking and kind of put me in a very tricky place mentally. And so the semester after was certainly a lot of sort of, I don't want to say recollecting the experience, but a lot of my next semester was referring back to my circumnavigation and things I did and research I did. And I was writing my thesis using my research. So a lot of it was rehashing some of the more traumatic points of my trip, which for me was good and bad. Like some things I could really kind of come to terms with, and some things I really could not. And it took me until about 6 months, 7 months after my circumnavigation to really understand what I was going through with mental health and with going through some of these things that I had went through. Because it was I didn't really know how I felt, and it took me until I really felt like I needed someone else to help me understand it. Is when I fully understood the impact of my circumnavigation. And now I look back on it as, wow, I really had to work through a lot of things. I'm glad I did that. But at the time you don't really see that growth and this kind of mindset. So overall, I don't want to that my response was a bit negative, and it's definitely not meant to be negative, but that is how my first few months after my circumnavigation went. And now looking back, I think there was a lot more positives to that semester, or maybe a few months after my trip, which I can now take as a overall positive experience. And even though I did not necessarily do a social media focused program after my circumnavigation, I did do a lot of work with social media and strategy, which helped me a lot, just knowing all these different platforms and what is sort of trends on each platform to look out for. That helped me a lot in some of my future roles. From a professional standpoint, the circumnavigation allowed me to recognize, I guess, intention and influence versus just sort of random emotional outbursts. I guess that makes sense. When there's a clear direction toward a trend versus when it's just sort of like random outbursts, if that makes sense. So in Islamabad, in Pakistan, I understood much more about social media as a collective, and how groups, how individuals, how networks are using social media for either promoting disinformation or promoting information that might be false to those, let's say, in Azerbaijan, where people are using social media but differently. They're using it in more of a positive way, trying to highlight trends that are meant to improve, to sort of revitalize society and create a more positive approach toward things. I began my career thinking I was going to go on a diplomatic track, following kind of the traditional public service, going into the eventual the foreign service or becoming a U.S. diplomat. So I interned with the U.S. Department of State. I worked for them. I worked for different branches of the U.S. military. And as I was in that sort of pathway. I found myself interested in what I was doing, but I wasn't truly excited about work. I wasn't excited about what I was doing. I was interested in it, but I wasn't excited by it. So I found myself transitioning more towards um, another kind of public service, but more in the education space. So I found myself working in international education, specifically on counseling, and that's a different way I think of connecting different cultures and people around the world. So I transitioned that way. I began counseling 4 years ago, and that's where it's taking me today. I learned a lot about myself in on the trip, and apart from learning how to navigate many different airports and many different systems of transportation, I think it taught me more of how I can be resilient and go through pretty much everything that a 10-week journey alone requires you to go through. Being sick, or like learning how to navigate cities, or when your research is so overwhelming that you have to spend hours on hours transcribing things, or when it's really dry and you have to go and find sources basically like from the cold, right? And so that taught me a lot about how to be independent, how to find things quickly, and really prioritize different, measures of qualitative research. From a bit more of a personal aspect, I also learned a lot about how or what it's like to just kind of be an independent traveler, and like I said before, go through all of those hardships, but also like the joys of them too. And um, as an introvert, it kind of allowed me to really like have a bit more of a sense of self and recognize that this is how I like to live, is more alone, and that's okay for me. Of course, I still like to speak with people, so there was some extroversion, of course, but as an introvert, I enjoyed a lot of that alone time, for the most part. Circumnavigation really allowed me to understand more of what it means to be um, uh, culturally fluid, I guess is that, maybe I'm looking for that word, but really flexible in many different environments. And so as I went on to follow along my diplomatic career, I was really able to acclimate to new places quickly and understand kind of what my goal was, the needs I had in each place, whether that was um, technology related or health related, whatever. I was much quicker to acclimate to new places, and the long, traveling experiences, long flights have never bothered me since. After 16 hours in a middle seat from Boston to Hong Kong, nothing bothered me. So that's really been some good like, personal / professional gains. I think also in terms of my interest, it allowed me to focus more on people focused, people oriented fields, rather than maybe more of like the data oriented space. I was much more interested in the qualitative and working with people. Basic travel advice and some things is just sort of, particularly related to the circumnavigation. But I think the first thing is less is more. So I spent a lot of time on planes in a short period of time. And I think longevity in a location is helpful, not only for oneself, but also for one's research. And I think if I had been able um, if I could have restructured my trip, I would have given myself a little more time in Asia, because that's where a lot of my research, I felt like there's a lot more information there that I just didn't have time to get to. So that's the first thing, is one does not have to hit the number of countries to get the data, but actually the time and the ability to really reflect on everything you're doing and understand, and then go further. That's, I think, a really important thing. Number two is never underestimate the airport in more ways than one. Be it when airports do close, even though we don't always think they do, and so always make sure that you are aware of local airport closings. If the airport closes at 2 o'clock in the morning and your flight's at 6, you want to make sure that you are aware of that, so that way if you arrive and the airport's shut, you're not just waiting outside in the curb. That definitely happened. The other tip I have for future grantees is that we are in a very unique position as recipients of an award like this, and the award, while it might not be something that is necessarily well known to everyone, beyond in the world, it's a very unique experience that takes some time to understand and reflect upon. The results won't come in a week, maybe even a month. It might take a little bit longer. And so know that the circumnavigation will be a experience that stays with you for a long time, in many ways. And so allowing time for that reflection, even if a few months down the line, or while you finish your research project, is still really important to truly, I think, make the most of the experience. One thing that I found really helpful, especially towards the latter half of my trip, was writing and recording and getting all of those ideas you have literally as soon as that meeting is over, or as soon as that research participant stops talking to you, getting everything out there. Because sometimes you're rushing from one edge of the city to another. I was in Istanbul. I remember going from one spot to the other spot to make sure I made it on time. And sometimes you just forget with all of these different experiences you have going on, or the jet lag or whatnot. And so writing and recording as you go is super helpful, just so you make sure you gather everything correctly. Thankfully, all of my research associates, I guess we could say, or subjects perhaps, were very happy with the data I collected, and everything was correct. But as you're going along, even at the end of the day, just recording what went on can be really helpful for future use, or it might make the end research report a bit easier to write if you have a couple paragraphs from each day that you can refer back to. There's nothing else like the Circumnavigator's Grant. Every time I speak to someone, every time I reference, oh yeah, I did this research trip and traveled to 10 different countries in the summer, and all of these things, people are just like, was it a Fulbright? No. Was it this? No. But the way the grant is structured, not only like pushes oneself, but also it really encourages you to have different perspectives on an issue from different cultures, and create these connections that go beyond just like one country by itself, or one region, but you have to go to many different continents and different places, which is unique. If you think about other large awards, which I won't name them particularly, they might be a little more restricted. I myself have been awarded one of those that restricted me to one place. It was great. I loved the experience, but being required is a strong word, but strongly recommended to go to different countries and connect all of the dots, is something that you don't see very often. And from like an employability aspect, or in my case was graduate school, that was a big point for me to reference. Yeah, I did this that very few other people have done, which is quite a unique point to reference.